So Crimson Desert was one of the few actually decent looking upcoming MMOs for fans of the genre. And while the game, with some new gameplay and information that recently came out, is looking really darn good, it's been confirmed that it's no longer an MMO. Why does everyone in the game industry hate this genre of games? Why can't we just get more of these games? Anyways, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here to share with you what we've learned. But again, I think the first part of my statement is definitely true. Crimson Desert looks really great. So when the game was first revealed back in late 2019, the original pitch was that this was a new MMORPG from the makers of Black Desert Online. While there are some misgivings, if you will, about BDO, I think it's still by and large considered one of the top 5 best MMOs, at least here in the Western market. And there's lots of people who've gotten lots of enjoyment out of that game, myself included. And Crimson Desert was appearing to take some of what they did with BDO and take it in a new, refreshed direction. That first reveal trailer that we got opened up with a bunch of cinematic combat sequences. They went through various shots of the game's landscapes, checking out towns, characters, and it was pretty clear just from that initial trailer that the game was going to have a focus on story. Well, slowly we started to get some bits and information about the game. It was left a little vague, but they did say they wanted to feature this immersive single-player campaign in addition to having traditional MMO content. Now, exactly what that meant, like what was that traditional MMO content, it was left a little unclear. The early footage gave us a sense that the action combat in the game was going to be somewhat similar to BDO. In fact, since it's from the same company and it had a kind of similar look, we were assuming that there's going to be a lot in common with BDO, but with, again, that single-player narrative focused. And there were rumors floating around, although I don't know where they were coming from, but I was seeing rumors that there's going to actually be endgame PvE in this game, things like dungeons and raids, which is a clear thing that is missing from their other game, Black Desert. So it was a neat idea. You would have this MMO that did have a story focus, but was still an MMO, and was also potentially going to have more of the basic traditional MMO endgame content that a lot of us expect from the genre. And we knew finally that the game was being made for both PC and consoles, and originally they said there was a beta planned for some time in 2020. Well, we're just a couple days away from the close of 2020. A beta hasn't come, but a couple weeks ago, we got a bunch of new information, including some more gameplay for Crimson Desert. So lots of cinematic shots of various biomes. We see things like mountains covered in snow. There are forests, plains, deserts, plenty of what look to be cutscenes with the main character and what is his party of mercenaries. There are villages chock full of NPCs. We see some horse riding. We see the main character stepping into these ruins and being transported to another dimension. And then there's a bunch of actual combat footage. Again, no UI and not actual, but you know what I'm saying. So it's flashy. There's a clear melee focus. It's an action combat system with apparently all sorts of combo potentials, like we see blocking, dodging, parries, counterattacks, shoves, and kicks. There are takedowns and finishers. We see a bunch of different weapon types, like there's a sword and shield, a two-handed axe, a bow is used, and just in general, it looks to be very reminiscent to Black Desert Online. In fact, I think it's worth noting, originally, Crimson Desert was supposed to be a prequel to BDO, and then they said it was a spin-off, but still an MMO with a story focused, and now, as we're going to get to in a moment, it's apparently just not an MMO. We see some minimalistic health bars in there, and like a bunch of different takedowns. Apparently they took a lot of inspiration in this game from just wrestling, and so we see like suplexes and drops and leg kicks, just all sorts of stuff. We also see enemies used as a shield, so pretty cool. Lots of bits and pieces of the game's combat, and again, I think it looked really good. And beyond the combat, we also got a glimpse into some of the various systems and things that could be done in the game. We see some sort of a tracking system. We see traversing of this invisible bridge. There's some puzzle solving, the mounting of a dragon, some rope swings and climbing. We see fights with wildlife. There's a bunch of different kind of boss fights in there as well. And we also see what appears to be a castle siege, and finally flying a dragon. The trailer really got me pumped to see Crimson Desert, the MMO, but But along with the release of this video came an updated description of exactly what the game is. And for anyone like myself who was hoping it was going to be the next big MMO from the creators of Black Desert, yeah, the news is not good. So what is it exactly? Well, currently the game is described by the developer as an open-world action-adventure that combines elements of narrative-driven single-player games with online multiplayer functionality. Built on Pearl Abyss's proprietary next-gen engine, Crimson Desert will deliver high-fidelity graphics and game features and a highly immersive gameplay experience. A story of survival, Crimson Desert follows a group of struggling mercenaries and the many characters who cross their paths in a vast open world. So this is an open-world action-adventure game with some multiplayer functionality. This is the official description from the developer themselves. This is what's seen on the latest uploaded videos. And again, you will notice there is no more mention of the word MMO, MMORPG. It's just not in there. All we see is online multiplayer. But that's not like super solid ground to confirm that this is not an MMO. So there's a few more things I should mention. So the first few videos that came out, and literally they are still uploaded on their official channel unchanged, in the description of the first few videos, it was called an upcoming MMORPG from the creators of BDO. Now, all of the recent trailers, there's not a single mention of MMO or any variation of MMO in it. But there's more. There's also no longer any mention of MMO on their official website, which there used to be. And then finally, we got some interviews with the game's producers that has confirmed the game's shift in genre and focus. The game genre still causes me some concern. In the past, it has been said, we will show you what the next generation MMORPG is. But there have been many concerns about the direction of production ever since. Finally, I had to make a decision about what we want to show in Crimson Desert and what kind of product we want to deliver and what aspects of multiplayer mode and learning we can import from Black Desert. The Crimson Desert that we designed has to focus more on the main adventure experience and less on the dispersion caused by today's MMORPG models. The multiplayer mode will not be activated permanently, but if the player wants to play together, this will be possible. One of the game's other producers followed that up in saying this, and if you think about it, this is not the end of the world. On the contrary, you will accompany Mac Duff, that's the main character in this game, on a journey through a vast open world. Crimson Desert is a game with great multiplayer aspects where the player can invite a friend or play with others in the community. So, it's not an MMO. There will be multiplayer co-op elements to the game, but there's still a lot unclear about how exactly that's going to work. Is it just co-op within the narrative single-player story-driven campaign, or is it going to be some co-op end-game activities? Because we do know there are going to be things akin to dungeons in this game, but I don't know if they're like Holy Trinity required dungeons or just dungeon crawling in any old single-player RPG like Skyrim. Like, I go into dungeons in Skyrim, but we're not going to call that game an MMO either. So as you can see, it's still pretty damn vague as to how exactly this co-op, multiplayer, working with other people within the game, how exactly is it going to work? They still have not really been specific about it, but we do at least know for sure that it has changed enough that they're no longer calling it an MMO, an MMORPG, no variation of massive multiplayer. They're just calling it a game with, it's an open world action adventure game with online multiplayer. So it's not going to have quite the massive, and you know, this is a company familiar with what it means for a game to be an MMO because they're the ones who've made Black Desert. It's, again, whether you love it or hate it, it's still unarguably one of the bigger, more successful active MMOs in the market right now. So they know what an MMO is. They know what it means for a game to be an MMO, so much so that they said that this is no longer an MMO, but will have elements of it. It's freaking, just take a shot every time I say MMO in this video. Beyond the news that this game has shifted, and I just gotta say, to touch on this quickly, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. Like, I think it could be cool to have this open world action adventure game from the creators of BDO, but just have some sort of optional multiplayer within it, or some multiplayer activities in the end game, or whatever the hell it ends up being, because we don't know, because they're still super vague. I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I mostly played Black Desert Online solo, and I freaking loved it. I know that game gets shit on a lot. I know there's some predatory shit within their like cash shop, the fact that you feel like you need to buy a bunch of pets or certain costumes for PvP, or being able to buy to constantly afford the shards failing to upgrade your weapons and gear, whatever. You know, I realize the game's got some problems, but at its core, like, it's like there's a good game there if you could pull that predatory junk out of it. I have no doubt that they can make a good, fun game to play that I would enjoy. I do wish they would take another shot at MMOs, but maybe what's the point if they already have BDO and the game's still going well enough and it's still fairly successful, by all accounts it is. Maybe that's the other part of this coin, that they didn't want to cannibalize their own player base in BDO. I probably just answered the freaking question. There we go. Yeah, they don't want to cannibalize their player base in BDO, so this is more of a single player game with some multiplayer elements. There was a bunch of other developer info that came through beyond the gameplay video that came out at the Game Awards. They released a few other videos with commentary on the gameplay video, and this sheds some more light on some of the things they're doing with Crimson Desert. They said they want to focus on things that they never tried before, really kind of emphasizing the adventuring and exploration of the world. And in part, in doing this, they focused on making sure like big landmarks and points of interest would be visible from afar. So things like those snow-capped mountains you see in the distance, as to naturally draw players to move in that direction. A lot of work also went into the visuals. That was pretty clear from both trailers we've seen. They've got things like these volumetric clouds during sunrise and sunset. They really focused on making sure they had proper lighting throughout the day, and the lighting looks freaking good. And they said things, this was funny, they said even blades of grass should be visible from afar. That is hilarious to anyone who plays Black Desert, because one of the things that game is notorious for is just horrendous pop-in, like things 10 meters in front of you just popping up out of nowhere, just because the game's rendering distance is so very small. So I guess they're saying here, you're gonna see blades of grass from afar, everybody. Good, great, fantastic. Maybe no pop-in Crimson Desert. They said the story of Crimson Desert revolves around this character named Macduff. M-A-C-D-U-F-F. Macduff is his, okay, who hails from the lands known as Quiden. Macduff's heritage is a major source of conflict in the game. They say players will come across villages packed with NPCs that you can talk to, hear their stories, and try to resolve their issues. One of the strong points of Black Desert Online is there was a lot of NPCs to talk to, and they also went about their daily activities. Like, it was, the game really felt lived in, like the NPCs were actual characters with their own lives and direction and desires and all that stuff. They say the game's gonna have fishing as well as horse riding and other activities to pass the time. And they say that the dungeons in the game are unlike any other place, where basically you enter, we saw this in the trailer, the character enters through these ruins and it's like this portal to another dimension. Time is distorted and you're transported somewhere else. It looks pretty darn cool, their kind of take on how dungeons will work. They touched on how the combat with it, they're trying to create what they're saying is the most engaging melee combat system possible. You can have one-on-one fights or take down groups of enemies, and they constantly were asking themselves in developing this combat system if it was both realistic but also fun to play. Like, characters can drop their weapons, and these can also be picked up off the ground. There will be things like guard breaks, grappling, and all sorts of wrestling moves. We saw a lot of that in the trailer. You can grab enemies to use them as a shield, and they said they also took inspiration from Taekwondo, including certain kick techniques from that martial art. There will be all sorts of puzzles and mysteries to uncover. We saw that in the Invisible Bridge and that rune matching pressure plate game. Environmental traversal like rope swinging and scaling ledges, which we saw. And they mentioned here, this is really cool, that in defeating bosses, you will learn their techniques. So we saw a glimpse of this like lightning wielding monster, and then once they're defeated, you gain access to wield the lightning. It's like a Kirby style system, which I think is pretty darn dope. And that is basically it. Those are the official bits of information. That is a wrap up of the confirmation basically that this game is not an MMO. While I'm disappointed that there is a genre change, I think I get it. Like I mentioned halfway through here, they probably don't want to cannibalize their own player base in Black Desert by releasing a near identical game. So they're going to make this, hey, this is their single player focused game. There will be some co-op multiplayer elements, but don't expect it to replace BDO because they don't need to replace BDO. It really is. It's like the top 5. There's like WoW, ESO, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, and BDO. Those are the big MMOs that everyone talks about, everyone plays, at least in the spheres in which I play and read about gaming stuff. Like that's the big 5. You got a game in the big 5 of MMOs. Why would you try to replace it with a new one? I mean, it's the same reason WoW 2 isn't getting released in the next 10 years. Because WoW is still massively successful, so they're not going to replace it. Anyways, despite all of that, and as much as I'm an MMO fanboy and would have loved to see them try something new, different, whatever, I think this just looks pretty good. Like, and depending on how heavily they lean into the co-op multiplayer elements, even though it might not be an MMO in the traditional sense, they have dungeons, maybe they do have raid equivalents that you can team up with people. Like, okay, you're playing this character who has a band of mercenaries with you or as part of your adventuring. What if there's like endgame dungeon equivalents where you replace your band of mercenaries with other real players? Boom. This might not be an MMO, but there could be some of the core aspects of MMOs that we still enjoy. Like maybe you're not gonna see 1,000 people farming frogs in the wetlands here in Crimson Desert to try to get their witch's earring or whatever the shit, but you could still have some of those aspects of MMOs that you enjoy, and maybe they do bring that stuff to Crimson Desert. Maybe, who knows? We don't know. They're still super vague about so much. So anywho, that is it. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. A little recap on what Crimson Desert is and what it is not. I'm still looking forward to learning more about this game. Please be less vague. And also, when is this thing coming out? Who knows? I guess if it's a single player game, maybe it does come out next year. Right? Anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time.